On a dirt road outside Jerusalem, on a Sunday afternoon, two people are walking home and arguing about a funeral. A stranger falls in beside them and asks what they are talking about. They assume he must be the only man in the country who has not heard. So they tell him, and he tells them they have missed something, and then he does the thing nobody wrote down. He starts at Moses. He works through all the prophets. He shows them, passage by passage, where the whole library was pointing. Luke gives us one sentence for it. He does not give us the list. That lecture is the most valuable lost document in Christian history, because everybody since has tried to rebuild it. Every Christmas reading, every study Bible margin, every list of prophecies fulfilled. Some of the entries on those lists are exactly what they claim to be. Others are doing something much stranger and much more interesting. Some are not predictions at all. One of them is plainly about Israel leaving Egypt, and Matthew applies it to a toddler anyway. One turns on a single Hebrew word that does not mean what your Christmas card thinks it means. One survives because of a scrap of leather found in a desert cave. So here is the promise. We are going to walk the whole reading list, the major passages, in order, and read every one of them twice. Once the way its first audience heard it, then the way the New Testament writers used it, and we are not going to hide the gap between the two, because the gap is where the actual argument lives. Start with a problem nobody mentions. In the first century, there was no agreed checklist, no document anywhere saying, here is what the Messiah will do. The word itself is ordinary, Mashiach, anointed, smeared with oil. It is what you did to a king or a priest or occasionally a prophet. It gets used of Saul, of David. It even gets used in Isaiah of Cyrus, a Persian emperor who did not worship the God of Israel at all. So when people in that century said Messiah, they were not all picturing the same man. We can prove that because we have their library. In the caves above the Dead Sea, one community left behind its rulebook, and the rulebook is waiting for 3 people, not 1, until the coming of the prophet and the messiahs of Aaron and Israel. Plural, a priest and a king, with the prophet walking in ahead of both. Others expected a warlord. Others a heavenly figure on clouds. So the New Testament writers are not ticking boxes on a form that already existed. They are arguing that a shape existed, scattered across centuries of text, and that it fits one man. And the way they argue is not the way we argue. A modern reader hears prophecy and thinks prediction. Text goes in, event comes out, match confirmed. Sometimes the Bible does exactly that. But ancient Jewish readers also read for pattern. Scripture was not only a set of forecasts, it was a set of shapes that God is in the habit of repeating. Exodus is a shape. Exile and return is a shape. A younger son chosen over an elder one is a shape. Israel keeps living them again. So when a first-century writer says something was fulfilled, he often means, the shape came round again, and this time it came round all the way. That is called typology, and it is not a cheat. It is how the Hebrew Bible already reads itself, centuries before there is a single Christian in the room. Isaiah promises a new Exodus. Jeremiah promises a new covenant shaped like the old one. Pattern reading is native to the material. What is new is the claim about who completes it. Hold that in your hand, because we are about to hit passages where prediction works beautifully, and passages where it does not work at all. The New Testament is doing both, on purpose, and it usually tells you which. Begin at the beginning. Genesis 3. The garden is over. 3 sentences of judgment get handed out, and the first one lands on the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. In its own setting, this is not obviously about a savior. It reads like an origin story for why human beings and snakes cannot be in a room together. Feet and heads. One strikes low, one strikes down. Ancient people everywhere told stories shaped like that one. But two things in the Hebrew keep a door open. The word is zera, seed, offspring. It can mean one descendant or 10,000. And the pronoun that follows it is singular. He, not they. One offspring, one heel, one head. The Greek translators noticed. Their word for seed is neuter and should take a neuter pronoun, and they wrote a masculine one instead. He. Later, Latin went further and wrote she, which is where all those paintings of Mary standing on a snake come from. That is a translation, not a text. The New Testament never quotes this verse outright. It does something quieter. Paul tells the Romans that God will soon crush Satan under their feet. Tradition calls it the proto-evangelium, the first gospel. It is best read as the seed of a theme, not a forecast with a date attached. Now Jacob is dying in Egypt, and he calls his 12 sons in to hear what will happen to them in days to come. Judah is fourth in line, not the eldest, not the favorite, and he walks out of that room holding the crown. Judah is a lion's cub. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until, and here the Hebrew goes strange, until Shiloh comes. Shiloh. Nobody is certain what that word is doing. It is a place name everywhere else. Here it is either a title or a phrase that is worn down over time. The ancient translators split exactly the way modern ones do. Some read until tribute comes to him. Some read until he comes to whom it belongs. Both land in the same place. Judah holds the staff until somebody arrives who is the whole point of the staff. Revelation just calls him the Lion of Judah. Numbers 24. A foreign diviner named Balaam has been hired to curse Israel, and he cannot make his mouth do it. Instead, he gives 4 oracles, each one better for Israel than the last. And in the 4th, he sees something a long way off. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Star and scepter. In the ancient world, a star rising over a nation meant a king, and every person listening knew it. The lines that follow are about Moab and Edom, which fits David's conquests neatly enough. The oracle has a near horizon, but not now, not near, keeps that horizon open past David, and it stayed open for 1,000 years. In the year 132, a rebel commander drove Rome out of much of Judea and minted his own coins. His name was Simon Bar Kokhba. The greatest rabbi of the age applied this verse to him and renamed him Son of a Star, Bar Kokhba. 3 years later, Rome killed him and the name curdled, which tells you the verse was live ammunition and that quoting it does not settle who it fits. Deuteronomy 18. Moses is old, Israel is about to lose him, and he tells them what happens after he is gone. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. In context, this is institutional. The surrounding paragraph is a law about telling true prophets from false ones. Israel is being promised it will not be left without a voice, but like me is an extremely high bar. And Deuteronomy closes by saying that no prophet has arisen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. So the book ends with a vacancy. The office is described in chapter 18, and the last page says nobody has ever filled it. That vacancy is why the Samaritans were waiting for a prophet, why the Dead Sea Rulebook waits for one alongside its 2 messiahs, and why crowds in John's Gospel keep asking a wandering teacher whether he is the prophet, capital letter, the one who was supposed to come. Peter, preaching in the temple after the resurrection, quotes this verse and applies it straight to Jesus. That is not a stretched reading. That is the plain one. 2 Samuel 7 is the hinge of the entire subject. David is finally at peace, and the peace is bothering him. He is living in a cedar palace. The Ark of God is still under canvas. He tells the prophet Nathan he wants to build God a house. God says no, and then makes a play on words that turns into the most consequential promise in the Old Testament. You will not build me a house, I will build you one. The word house flips from a building to a dynasty inside a single sentence. I will raise up your offspring after you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And your throne shall be established forever. The near meaning is not hidden. It is Solomon. He is the son. He builds the temple. The text says so almost immediately. And when he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men. That is not a sentence about a sinless Savior. That is a real, flawed king. But then there is the other word, forever. Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. And 4 centuries later, Babylonian soldiers put out the eyes of the last king of David's line and carry him away to Babylon in chains. The throne stops. The promise has no escape clause in it. Israel is left holding a forever with nobody sitting in it. Every messianic hope after that date is, in some form, an answer to that hole. A promise was made about a house that no longer exists. So when Gabriel tells a girl in Nazareth that God will give her son the throne of his father David, he is quoting an unpaid debt. The Psalms come next, and they are not predictions in the ordinary sense. They are songs, used in the working life of an actual monarchy. Psalm 2 is a coronation song. The nations rage, the kings plot, and God laughs and installs his king on Zion anyway. Then the king reads out the decree. You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Today, on the day of the crowning. This is adoption language. The standard ancient way a royal court said that a new king is God's son. In Israel, it was already a stretch because Israel's kings kept losing. The song outlived every single man who ever sang it, so it slowly became a song about a king who has not arrived yet. That shift happens inside Judaism before any Christian touches it. Paul, preaching in a synagogue in Pisidian Antioch, quotes, "Today I have begotten you," and applies it to the resurrection, not to the birth, to the enthronement. Psalm 16 is a psalm of confidence, and everything hangs on one line near the end of it. You will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. In Hebrew, that last word can mean the pit as easily as decay. The plain sense is, you will not let me die down here, not yet. Any Israelite getting over a bad illness could sing that honestly. It is not obviously about anybody's grave. Then at Pentecost, Peter stands up in Jerusalem and builds an argument out of it that only works in that one city. David wrote this. David said he would not be abandoned to the grave. And then Peter points down the road. The patriarch David died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Every person in that crowd could walk over and look at it. So either the psalm failed, or David was talking about somebody else. That is the whole argument, and it is a real argument. It also leans on the Greek word for corruption rather than the Hebrew word for pit. Peter is preaching from the Bible of the diaspora, and it matters. Psalm 22 is the strangest of them all. It is a lament. No king in it, no promise, no prediction. Just a man being destroyed in public, describing it as, it happens. And the first line is the one everybody already knows. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus says it from the cross in Aramaic, and Mark writes down the raw sound of it, which raises a question people rarely ask. Is he despairing, or is he sighing? In a culture that names a psalm by its first line, both at once, because the psalm does not stay there, it turns. It ends with the nation's remembering, and the deed being told to a generation not yet born. Now read the middle of it. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. All four Gospels put that detail at the crucifixion. Roman execution squads did take the clothes. The overlap is not manufactured. And then verse 16, which is the most argued over line in the Hebrew Bible on this whole subject. Your Bible probably says they have pierced my hands and my feet. The standard Hebrew text, as voweled, does not say that. It has a word that reads like a lion. My hands and my feet, like a lion, which is grammatically rough and nobody can make it behave. The ancient Greek translation, made before Christianity existed, has a verb instead. They dug, they bored through, for centuries that looked like a Christian convenience. Then a scroll came out of a cave at Nahal Haver, copied in the 1st century. And in that manuscript, the word ends in the letter that makes it a verb, not a noun. They dug through my hands and my feet. That does not close the case. Scholars still argue about the verb's exact force, but it does kill the accusation that Christians invented the reading. Psalm 110 is short, strange, and the New Testament simply cannot leave it alone. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand, until I make your enemies your footstool. 2 lords. The first is God's own name. The second is a human superior, and the psalm's heading credits David, who is therefore calling somebody my Lord. Then verse 4, stranger still. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek appears in Genesis for 3 verses and vanishes. A king of Salem who is also a priest, from before there was any priesthood to belong to. In Israel, kings were not priests. The 2 offices were kept apart deliberately, and a king who forced the issue came out of the temple with leprosy. This psalm holds both in one man and swears an oath about it. Jesus uses it as a riddle in the temple courts. If David calls the Messiah Lord, how is the Messiah David's son? He never answers. He leaves the question sitting on the floor, and after the resurrection his followers quote that one verse more than almost any other line in the Hebrew Bible. Now the hardest passage in this video, and probably the one you have been waiting for, Isaiah 7. It is not Christmas. It is a war. 2 kings, Rezin of Syria and Pekah of Israel, are marching on Jerusalem to pull its king off the throne. That king is Ahaz, and he is terrified. Isaiah goes out to meet him at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool, with his own son beside him. The message is that it will not happen. Then God offers Ahaz a sign, anything he wants, and Ahaz refuses it behind a pious excuse. So Isaiah gives him a sign anyway. Behold, the Alma shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And there is the word the whole argument runs through. Alma. It occurs 7 times in the entire Hebrew Bible. It means a young woman of marriageable age. In that culture, in practice, usually unmarried, and therefore usually a virgin. But that is an implication of the situation, not the meaning of the word. Hebrew has a more precise word for virgin, and Isaiah does not use it here. That is the objection, and it is a fair one. You will meet it eventually, so you should meet it from us first. Then keep reading, because the context tightens further. Before the boy knows how to refuse evil and choose good, the land of those 2 kings will be deserted. That is a clock. It is a sign for Ahaz, in Ahaz's own lifetime, about a war that ended in the 8th century before Christ. And in the very next chapter, Isaiah goes to his wife, who conceives and bears a son, and a nearly identical deadline is attached to that child. So there is a real 8th century baby in the frame. Any reading that pretends otherwise is not actually reading Isaiah. Now, the other half of it. 2 centuries later, Jewish translators in Egypt turned Alma into Greek, and the word they chose was Parthenos. Parthenos does mean virgin, unambiguously. Jews made that choice in a Jewish Bible before there was any Christian reason on earth to make it. Matthew is quoting that Greek. He did not invent it, and he is doing exactly what he does all the way through his first 2 chapters. He takes a passage where God gave Israel a sign of his presence in a child and says, "It has happened again, and this time it went all the way down." Emmanuel, God with us. That was the whole content of Isaiah's sign, and Matthew's gospel closes on the same promise. I am with you always. Isaiah 9 belongs with it. Same crisis, same king, and the light comes up over precisely the region Assyria smashed first. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. Then 4 titles, and the titles are where this stops sounding like a royal birthday card. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Court poetry in the ancient world did pile divine titles onto kings. Egypt did it. Assyria did it. The form is not unique to Israel, but the content is unusual inside Israel, where calling a man Mighty God is not a normal compliment, and it ends on David's throne forever. That word again. And Matthew, who cares about geography more than we tend to notice, opens Jesus' ministry in Galilee and quotes this passage to explain why there. Isaiah 11 gives us the picture the whole tradition would use afterwards. A stump. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. A stump means the tree has been cut down. Isaiah is looking at the house of David and calling it a felled trunk before it has even fallen. And out of that dead wood, one green shoot. Not a new tree. The same root, lower down, starting over. The Spirit of the Lord rests on him. He judges the poor with righteousness, and he does not judge by what his eyes happen to see. And then the animals. Wolf with lamb, calf with lion. A small child with his hand over a snake's den, and nothing happens, which is the garden again, running backwards. The enmity of Genesis 3, undone at the level of creation itself, and now the passage that has done more work than any other, the 4th of Isaiah's servant songs, Isaiah 53. Read it cold, not knowing what it is, and it is genuinely shocking. A figure disfigured past human likeness. Despised, a man other men look away from. He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He is cut off out of the land of the living. They made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death. Although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. And then, past the grave, he sees his offspring and prolongs his days. The overlap with the Passion narratives is not subtle, and the New Testament writers use this chapter more than any other single chapter. But the honest question is not whether it fits. The honest question is who Isaiah meant. Because Isaiah has a servant, and Isaiah names him, "You, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen." That is chapter 41. And in chapter 49, flatly, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified." So the standard Jewish reading, that the suffering servant is the nation itself, battered by empires and vindicated at the end, is not an evasion. It is taken straight off the page, out of Isaiah's own labeling. Anyone who tells you otherwise has not read chapter 41. And yet, Isaiah will not let the identification sit still. In that same chapter 49, the servant is given a mission to Israel, to bring Jacob back to him and to raise up the tribes, which is difficult to do if you are the tribes. So inside Isaiah, the servant is somehow the people, and somehow one figure who does for the people what the people cannot do for themselves. Ancient Israel already thought in that shape. A king embodies a nation. A priest walks into the holy place with a nation's names on his chest. That is the ground the New Testament actually stands on. Not, Isaiah secretly meant one man, and the Jews misread their own book. Rather, this shape has a person-sized hole in it, and here is the man, doing for Israel exactly what the serpent was always described as doing. In Acts, an Ethiopian official is sitting in a chariot reading this chapter aloud, and he asks the only sensible question there is. Is the prophet talking about himself or about somebody else? 2,000 years later, that is still the right question, and the entire argument is the answer. Jeremiah is next, and he is writing while the walls are coming down. The kingdom is ending. The temple is going. And in the middle of the worst book in the Bible to read at night, chapter 31 turns. Behold, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers, which they broke. This one goes inside them. I will put my law within them and write it on their hearts. And they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Notice that this is not a prediction of a person at all. It is a prediction of an arrangement. Nobody's biography is being sketched here. But at a table on his last night alive, a man picks up a cup and calls it the new covenant in his blood. He is telling you where he thinks he is standing. Ezekiel is in exile in Babylon, and his chapter 34 opens as an attack on Israel's leaders, whom he calls shepherds. You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The sheep are scattered over every hill with nobody looking for them. And then God says he will come and do it himself. I myself will search for my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and thick darkness. And 2 verses later, without explaining the shift at all, God says he will set one shepherd over them. My servant David. David has been dead for 400 years. Ezekiel is not confused. He is using the name as a job title. So the same chapter says God will shepherd them himself, and that David will shepherd them. And it never resolves the tension, which is worth holding on to when a Galilean teacher stands in the temple and says calmly, I am the good shepherd. Daniel 7 is a night vision, and it is the passage Jesus reaches for when he is finally asked a direct question. 4 beasts come up out of a churning sea. Empires, monstrous, one after another, each one worse than the last. Then the scene changes. Thrones are set in place. An Ancient of Days takes his seat, clothing white as snow, hair like pure wool. And with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. Everything else in that vision came up out of the sea. This one comes down out of the sky. That contrast is what the whole chapter is built on. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples and nations and languages should serve him, everlasting, not destroyed. Now, the vision's own interpretation says the kingdom is given to the saints of the Most High, a people. So again, the figure and the nation blur into each other, exactly like Isaiah's servant. That blur is a feature of this literature, not a mistake in it. But there is a person in the frame, and when the high priest asks Jesus directly whether he is the Messiah, this is what he hands back. You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Daniel 7 and Psalm 110 welded into one sentence. Nobody in that court asks him to explain it. They tear their clothes immediately. Daniel 9 is the arithmetic one, and it has to be handled carefully because this is where a lot of bad television lives. Daniel is praying about Jeremiah's 70 years of exile, and he is told the real number is 77s. From the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. And after the 62 sevens, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. Cut off. An anointed one. It is easy to see why this became a Christian favorite, and the shape genuinely is arresting. But be careful with the sums. The Hebrew has no definite article there. It says an anointed one, not the anointed one. And in Daniel's world, anointed one most often means a high priest. Most historians read the passage against the crisis of the 2nd century before Christ. A high priest named Onias was murdered. A Greek king desecrated the temple. Sacrifice stopped. Every line in the oracle has a candidate in that one decade. The numbers do not add cleanly to that decade either, which is why even critical scholars call them schematic rather than calendrical. So use this one honestly. It is a real oracle about an anointed one being cut off and a sanctuary destroyed. It is not a stopwatch. Every precise date calculation you have ever seen depends on choosing a starting decree, a length of year, and a text. 3 choices, none of them supplied by Daniel. Which brings us to the entry that ought to be embarrassing, and which is actually the key to this entire video. Hosea 11, verse 1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. There is no ambiguity here. None at all. It is not a prediction. It is not even in the future tense. It is God looking backwards, wistfully, at the Exodus. My son is Israel. Out of Egypt is the Exodus. And the very next line is that they went off and sacrificed to the Baals. So the verse is about a nation, in the past, misbehaving, and Matthew quotes it about a toddler being carried home from Egypt by his parents. If prediction is the only category you own, this is indefensible. Matthew looks like a man grabbing a phrase because it happens to contain the word Egypt. But watch what Matthew has been doing since his first page. A baby escapes a king who is killing infant boys. That is Moses. The child goes down into Egypt and comes back out again. That is Israel. He passes through water and then goes straight into the wilderness. Israel was 40 years in that wilderness and failed there. He is there 40 days, and every answer he gives is a quotation from Deuteronomy. Then he climbs a mountain and starts teaching. Matthew is not being sloppy. Matthew is being deliberate, and he expects a reader who knows the score. His claim is not that Hosea secretly meant Jesus. His claim is that Israel's story is a shape, and that one Israelite walked that shape from end to end, and that where the nation failed the pattern, he filled it. Out of Egypt I called my son is true of Israel, and Matthew says it came true again, on purpose. That is what fulfillment means in this literature. Not a box ticked on a form, a pattern filled full. Micah 5 is more straightforward, and it comes with a receipt. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. A ruler out of a village of no consequence, and pointedly not out of Jerusalem, which is where you would look for a king. Bethlehem matters because it is David's town. The claim is that God restarts the dynasty in the same place he started it. At the bottom, the receipt is that Matthew shows the verse being used by people who are not on his side. Herod asks his own scholars where the Messiah is to be born, and they answer out of the book without hesitating. Bethlehem of Judea. This was the settled expectation before anybody had a motive to invent it. Though notice what happens to the words on the way. Micah says Bethlehem is too little to be among the clans of Judah. Matthew's version says Bethlehem is by no means least among the rulers of Judah. He has flipped it and spliced in a line about shepherding from 2 Samuel, which tells you something about how quotation worked. He is not filing evidence in a courtroom. He is preaching a text he assumes you can already recite. Zechariah is writing after the exile to people rebuilding a small temple in a small province with no king at all, and chapter 9 tells them to celebrate anyway. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. The donkey is not a joke about modesty. It is a deliberate contrast with the animal. A conquering general rides through a captured gate, and the next verse makes it explicit. He cuts off the chariot and the war horse, and he speaks peace to the nations. This is one of the clearest cases on the whole list. And Jesus does not fulfill it passively. He arranges it. He sends 2 disciples ahead to fetch the animal. Whatever else is happening on that road, he is staging a quotation, and the crowd reads it correctly. Here is the honest footnote that critics enjoy. Hebrew poetry says the same thing twice. A donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. 1 animal, 2 lines. Matthew, writing for readers who care about the letter of a text, mentions 2 animals. Mark and Luke and John mention 1. It is the clearest window we have into how Matthew handles a quotation, and it should make you read him carefully, in exactly the way he would not mind. Then there is a line 7 chapters later that nobody expects in a book like this one. Zechariah 12. I will pour out on the house of David a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child. The grammar is famously difficult. Me and him inside the same clause, whatever the original setting was, and it is a scene of national mourning over a killing the community is guilty of. The sentence is extraordinary. John quotes it at the cross, right after the soldier's spear. Revelation quotes it about the end of everything. And the mourning in Zechariah is not to spare. It is the beginning of a fountain being opened for cleansing. That is where the chapter goes next. The last passage is the last page. Malachi, the end of the Christian Old Testament, and it closes on 2 figures rather than 1. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. Read that carefully. The messenger prepares the way before me, God's own way. And then the Lord arrives at his own house suddenly, and it is not comfortable. He is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. The question the passage asks is who can stand when he appears? Then the last lines of the book name the messenger. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and the hearts of children to their fathers. So the Hebrew Bible ends staring at a door, waiting for a man who is expected to walk in ahead of God himself. Every gospel opens with a man in the wilderness in a hair garment, which is exactly how the Bible describes Elijah, telling people to prepare a way. Jesus says of him, if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. And John, asked to his face whether he is Elijah, says no. Both of those sit in your Bible. Neither writer felt any need to tidy it up. So that is the reading list. And laid out end to end, you can see that it is not one kind of thing at all. Some of it is prediction in the plainest sense. Bethlehem, a king on a donkey, a servant pierced for other people's guilt. Some of it is a promise that was made and then broke and stayed unpaid for centuries. The throne of David is that. Some of it is a pattern Israel lived and lost, which the Gospels claim one Israelite walked all the way through without losing. And some of it is a single word, or a pronoun, or a scrap of leather in a cave, argued over for 2,000 years and argued over still. If somebody hands you a list of 300 prophecies fulfilled, treat it gently. Most such lists count every one of these as the same move. They are not the same move. And the honest version is more impressive than the tidy one, because the honest version can survive being checked. Here is what does not go away. Long before there was a cross, a body of literature kept producing the same silhouette from different centuries and different authors. A ruler out of Judah, a prophet like Moses, a son on David's throne, a shepherd, a servant crushed for other people, one like a son of man on the clouds. No Jewish group in the first century had assembled those into a single portrait. They were waiting, quite sincerely, for different men, which is why two people walking home from a funeral needed somebody to fall in beside them and show them how the pieces fit together, and why, when he had finished and vanished, the only thing either of them could think to say was that their hearts had been burning the whole way.